We've got a darn good one for you this morning, live on the Nicole Sandler Show, radioornot.com, SoFloRadio.com, TalkRadio1.com. We're broadcasting live on our website, FilterFreeRadio.com, and we're broadcasting live this morning on Liberal Justice Radio on the TuneIn app and TuneIn.com. Thanks to Kenny Pick. Big show today. We are live. It is Tuesday, February 25th, 2014. Jacob Dean and my super-duper awesome mass producer, co-host, and kick-ass all-around brother from another mother of Filter Free Radio, Mr. Skeptical Scott, are live with you this morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Good morning.
And we have a big show for you this morning. Coming up in just a couple of minutes. Matter of fact, in about 10 minutes from now, we're going to be joined by one of our good friends. He's a investigative journalist, Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield, out of Seattle. Mark is going to be joining us here in about, 10 minutes or so. We've got Mark wants to talk about a lot of things. News coming out, President Obama's calling for a raise in the minimum wage, $10.10 an hour. Does that go far enough? Because right now in Seattle, there is a $15 an hour minimum wage campaign. We're going to talk to Mark Taylor-Canfield about that. We're going to talk to Mark about a story we talked briefly about last week on Nicole Sandler's show, the 2014 World Press Freedom Index. Yes, free press in the United States is under attack, media suppression. We want to talk to Mark about that. He's an independent investigative journalist, musician, actor. He blogs at Huffington Post, Daily Kos, Truth Out, Op-Ed News, Free Speech Radio News on the Pacifica Network. Mark Taylor-Canfield is going to be joining us here in about 10 minutes. And then coming up in the second hour of the program, we have another awesome independent investigative journalist who's going to be joining us, Lee Fang, who is a reporting fellow with the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute. And he also writes over at republicreport.org. He's got a book out. He's an author now, Lee Fang is. He's got a book out titled The Machine, A Field Guide to the Resurgent Right, which was a recently published book on how right-wing political infrastructure has been rebuilt since President Obama's election. And we're going to talk to Lee about his new article, Obama administration's TPP trade officials received hefty bonuses from big banks. If you tuned in before the show, we played some pre-show music for you, and I just played Ry Cooder's No Banker Left Behind. So we're going to talk to Lee Fang coming up in the second hour of this program about his new article exposing how no bankers are left behind. And it was really cool to see Lee get a shout-out from Bill Moyers over the weekend. Bill Moyers and Company did a little thing there that talked about Lee. So we're going to get into all of that this program. I know we've been in for Nicole Sandler now for 3 or 4 days. And you might be getting a little tired of hearing Scott and I dialogue back and forth. So we're going to bring on some more voices, get some guests on, get some other voices into the conversation, and let that be your opportunity to participate in the program. That's what it's all about, participating. Our contact information scrolling across the top of your screen here. Our telephone number, 503-746-TALK. That's 503-746-8255. Give us a call, anything you want to talk about. We would love to have more voices participating in the conversation. Until we get Mark on, there are some news headlines that I wanted to mention really quick, news that we should know and be aware of, because we like to tend to focus on our safety bubbles here and kind of ignore what's going on in the rest of the world. By now, something is going on in Ukraine, right? It's a crisis like situation in Ukraine. They're in a state of crisis now after the country's democratically elected president was ousted over the weekend following months of street protests that have left at least the number I got in front of me now is at least 82 people are dead. The Ukraine president had something to do with that. They're trying to. They've issued an arrest warrant for him after he's fled the Ukraine capital, and they're focusing on a decision to strengthen ties with the EU rather than Russia. Some people Ukrainians want Ukraine to strengthen its ties with Russia. Others want Ukraine to strengthen its ties with the European Union. We will see. So far, at least 82 people are dead. Other news, in Thailand, at least 4 people were killed over this weekend. Last weekend, dozens were wounded in gunfire and bombing attacks at anti-government protests. 3 of those 4 people that were killed were children. Not good. In Afghanistan, Taliban gunmen have attacked an Afghan army base on Sunday, killing at least 21 soldiers in the worst single assault on Afghan forces since 2010. The attack comes as President Obama considering how many U.S. troops to keep in Afghanistan, how many to pull out. Washington Post says, we could leave 10,000 troops there, we could leave 3,000 troops there, we might not leave any troops there. Afghan President Hamid Karzai has refused to sign a deal to maintain U.S. troops beyond 2014. And this is following yesterday's report that we got from the Talk Radio News Service that Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is set to release a plan, which he did yesterday, to scale back the U.S. Army to its smallest force since before World War II. Ahead of that release, unnamed officials have told the New York Times that the plan would protect funding for special operations and cyber warfare. Scott and I talked a little bit about that yesterday. It's pretty obvious. You're seeing a transition from boots on the ground to drones. You're seeing a transition from, that's basically it. So
the automation of our war machine. If you've seen, I encourage people to watch Jeremy Scahill's Dirty Wars.
And if it wasn't for investigative journalists like Jeremy Scahill, how would we know about that? We wouldn't.
Yeah, Dirty Wars is just not only the interviews that he gave around that movie and around his work, but that movie itself is really compelling. I would encourage people to watch it.
And speaking of watching movies, Scott, I know we talk a lot about. We watch a lot of documentaries on Netflix, and the nail might be in the coffin as far as for net neutrality, because Netflix has agreed to pay Comcast for more speed and more faster direct access to its subscribers. And this is separate from the deal that just came about 10, 11 days ago last week, Comcast agreeing to buy out Time Warner, merging the 2 largest cable broadband providers together into basically a monopoly. And the latest deal could have major implications for net neutrality, the principle of equal and open access to the internet. In other words, if Netflix says, Comcast, we're willing to pay you to give us faster access and more direct access to the subscribers, well, then Comcast is going to say, wait a minute, that's another profit revenue stream for us. So now, not only do you have to pay if you want access to begin with, you have to pay more if you want better access. But that's kind of how it is as far as subscriber levels. As far as us, when you and me, when we try to get on the internet, you got to pay more to get faster internet, right? Well, when you're talking about these companies like Netflix, Comcast, Time Warner Cable, willing to negotiate, millions, billions, I don't know how much money, a lot more money than you and I got, it makes a bigger difference than just you and I. And no one's talking about the fact that the internet is the commons. The internet is today's library. And if we want to give our future a chance, we might as well provide the future with access to the commons for free.
Oh, yeah, man. All these things wouldn't have existed without government research. I mean, this was all created by the Defense Department, right? So
I can guarantee probably not any one of you, because this is an online program, Nicole Sandler's online Radio or Not program. I bet you no one is listening to this program right now at the library for free on the free library internet. Every one of us is paying somebody somehow to access this program, and I don't think that's right. I think you should get this program for free. I think you should get filter-free radio for free, which everything at filterfreeradio.com is free, other than you just have to pay to get on the internet. That's wrong. The internet is the commons, and we talk about organizing successful social movements, real solutions. What kind of social movement could we actually organize in America today? That's a question. I think the younger generation, the millennials, people my age, I'm 25, really could rally around free internet. It's not that radical of an idea. You know,
not to mention that most of Europe has 10 times faster internet than we do at a fraction of the cost, and yet they're arguing over how they're going to squeeze more money out of us to get to the point where we have faster internet like they do in Europe. It's like, in other words, it's the haves versus the have-nots. You can't afford to pay, well then no internet for you. So there is no net neutrality.
Yeah. So anytime you're talking about net neutrality, which it's in the news, obviously, think about how we could organize a nonviolent, successful social movement around free internet for all. Hey, they were going to do it, remember? At least here in Portland, they were going to give free Wi-Fi to everyone. At one point, they were going to construct the infrastructure of free Wi-Fi internet for the entire city. Guess what? Somebody said, wait a minute, that cuts into my profit revenue stream, so that can't happen. We need more. Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. It is so good to speak with you. If folks are just joining us, we have on the line now with us a friend of our show, and he's a fantastic investigative journalist. He's a musician. He is an actor. He blogs at Huffington Post, at Daily Kos, at truthout.org, on Op-Ed News, also on Free Speech Radio News on the Pacifica Network. You can find him on Facebook, facebook.com/mtaylorcanfield, and on Twitter. Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. You made me sound really busy. No wonder I'm so tired this morning.
Yeah. I've got our coffee here, so be sure to.
Oh, you're ahead of me on that one.
No, we couldn't get up this early without coffee, man. That's for sure. So, but you are busy, and you're doing a lot of reporting. And Mark, tell us some of the things that you've been getting into recently.
Well, my main focus lately has been on two issues. One is press freedom, especially in the United States, but also around the world. I've been following the events in the Ukraine pretty closely, and also reporting on local news here in Seattle, mainly our $15 an hour minimum wage campaign, and also an effort to bring progressive media voices back to the Seattle, Portland area, which we can definitely talk more about. But those are my main focuses these days. And we do invite journalists and activists from all over the country, sometimes politicians and other folks on to talk about what's going on in the country. So that's been going on for several years now, ever since the Occupy movement sort of hit its stride. And that call is still continuing.
That's great.
And so we're hearing a lot about the XL pipeline marches and a lot of activity that's going to be starting, I guess, next month in a few days.
Mark, and speaking of the Occupy movement, you're in Seattle, and talking about the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign. One of the leading figures behind that movement is the newly elected Seattle council, who self-described Occupy movement candidate, right, and socialist candidate, and the $15 an hour minimum wage there that's going on in Seattle, where you're at, Mark?
Yes, well, it's a very, very interesting story for several reasons. One, Shama Sawant has gained international attention after her victory, her underdog victory. No one actually expected her to win the election for the Seattle City Council seat in November. In fact, the night of the election, I interviewed her, and she had already said that she probably wasn't going to win. She'd already basically given up on the race, thinking that it wasn't possible to beat Richard Conlon, who'd been on the city council as long as I can remember. And so it was assumed that he had a really invincible seat, let's say, that there was no way that he was going to lose. But he did. Richard Conlon actually gave a concession speech about a week and a half later, after all the votes had finally been counted. And coming from several thousand votes from behind, she actually won the election with enough of a margin that there was no recount. So Councilmember Conlon gave her a lot of creds, actually, and I've never seen anything like it, Jacob. By the way, it's really great to talk to you, and I've been following what you and Scott have been doing since you guys started Filter Free Radio, so I wanted to give a shout-out to you for all your hard work on that, and the Thom Hartmann Show as well.
Scott's here with us. You can say hi, Scott.
Hey, Mark,
Scott,
I miss
how
you,
you
buddy.
doing?
Not bad, man. I miss you, man.
Yeah.
The days of talking to you during the Occupy movement back in 2011, it was great.
Yeah, well, listen, so my journalism has continued, and a shout-out to Free Speech Radio News, because unfortunately they went off the air last year, sort of a funding crisis. Right. But they have been one of the, in fact, I would say right up front that they are the most gung-ho journalists and editors that I've ever worked with. They're really amazing people. They've got reporters all over the world reporting on stories that no one else is talking about, and really keeping up on the cutting edge of media. And that's a whole subject, that we could talk about, because through Free Speech Radio News and places like that, I've been able to interview Dr. Vandana Shiva and Daniel Ellsberg and all sorts of amazing people. So shout out to Free Speech Radio News. It looks like we're back. The website is back now, and actually journalists are writing for the website now, which is something that really wasn't happening before. It was just a straight audio newscast that went out to college stations and community stations all around the country through the Pacifica Radio Network. The people who paid me were actually called Pacifica Reporters Against Censorship. So you can see that there was already a move underfoot for independence from the Pacifica Network. And it looks like we are at this point free. We are no longer directly connected to the Pacifica Network. It's an independent website now, and we're hoping that it will be back on the air on a lot of radio stations again very soon, because the initial contacts with those radio stations have been very positive, and they're willing to pay for the service. So yay, we can pay reporters again. That'll be great. There's great people all over the world. I keep thinking of Sam Olakoya in Africa reporting these crazy stories in the middle of government crises and huge protests against ExxonMobil and all this stuff. So really amazing stuff. Then
I was just going to say, Mark, and that really speaks to the free press being under attack here in the United States, and the media suppression, and this new report from the World Press Freedom Index, 2014 World Press Freedom Index, that says now the U.S. is ranked 46th overall now in terms of press freedom. And it's like, if you want to tell the truth anymore, you've got to go independent.
Glenn Greenwald is in Brazil. Greg Palast is, in the UK. So sometimes that's what happens. And as an American journalist, I cannot be proud of the fact that we are so low on this World Press Freedom Index. It's put together by a group that does advocacy worldwide for reporters called Reporters Without Borders. And if people want to get the details on the report for this year's World Press Freedom Index, you can go to rsf.org. That's for Reporters Sans Frontières, which is the French name because originally that group started in France. But they track freedom of the press all over the world and the treatment of journalists. And last year we were actually 37th, so we slipped again. The slip began actually during the Occupy movement when a lot of reporters and live streamers were arrested, and even associated press reporters were getting rounded up at these protests. This year, the ranking has dropped largely because of the treatment of whistleblowers. So you can see how that's playing out in the world press, and it is a major concern of mine, and it's something that, as a journalist, I have to focus on. Basically, these media outlets don't want to report it because it undermines their own credibility as journalists and news media. So there you go. That's the problem.
Well, that's ironic.
And whatever happened to that constitutional right of the Fifth Amendment where we can't incriminate ourselves? Or how about the First Amendment that says we have a right to...
We should be watching Finland, I guess, because they are usually number one. They've been number one for the last couple of years. But there are countries in North Africa, too, that are ahead of us on the list. Costa Rica is ahead of us on that list. So, yeah, we really need to start looking at what's going on in the United States. Part of that is also the Federal Communications Commission regulations and policies regarding corporate media consolidation, which is another big subject I like to talk about.
Yeah.
I did testify before the FCC at a hearing on media consolidation and brought up two reports that the FCC itself had commissioned, which showed the negative effects of corporate media consolidation in the United States, including reduced minority and female ownership of the media and also reduced local news. However, the FCC commissioners claimed that they didn't know anything about these reports that they themselves had funded. So it was really a slap in the face to me. I was standing there with the documents in my hand, and yet they claimed they didn't know anything about these reports. I even got a call from the chairman's office, which at that time was Colin Powell's brother, Michael Powell. He was the chairman of the FCC, and he and the Republicans on the FCC went full on for media consolidation and ignored all of this testimony around the country. We had two friends on the commission at that time, Adelstein and Copps, who both sided with the community radio and stations and journalists, but they were pushed aside, and media consolidation pushed through. There was a great map on Brad Friedman's website, Bradblog, that showed the red radio stations versus the blue radio stations in the United States. And what you're finding is that progressive and liberal media is disappearing quickly since the days of Air America. And what it's being replaced by are a lot of Clear Channel owned and Fox radio stations, which are heavy right-wing. We're talking Rush Limbaugh, Michael Savage, Glenn Beck, our guy from up here in Washington. And basically it's taking over the country. So in a lot of parts of the nation, if you're trying to listen to the radio, the only thing you're going to hear is right-wing talk, sports radio, or religious broadcasting.
Yeah, I know. I know the media is liberal because Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly, Ann Coulter, Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham, Pat Buchanan, Pat Robertson, Sean Hannity, and Rusty Humphreys told me so.
Well, that's the thing, is these folks like Limbaugh and Hannity and Beck are signed to exclusive contracts. So they are being paid, like $26 million a year in the case of Limbaugh to do these radio programs. And what happened was the network decided to buy their talent, so they signed into exclusive contracts. The problem is, Jacob and Scott, and Norman Goldman actually was in town a month ago, gave a great presentation on what I'm going to tell you. So it's coming straight from him. And he's been meeting with media consultants, and this is the story. by the way, that event up here in Seattle was put together by Progressive Radio Northwest, and you can go to their website. It's spelled out progressiveradionorthwest.org. They've been sponsoring media forums up here in Seattle, trying to bring a lot of these voices, like Nicole Sandler, Randy Rhodes, Mike Malloy, Norman Goldman, folks like that, back to the air in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And what Norman told us is that Clear Channel borrowed billions of dollars from Bain Capital, by the way, to buy up 880 radio stations around the country. There's another group called Cumulus, and they've also bought up hundreds and hundreds of stations. Well, Clear Channel did basically a leveraged buyout. They borrowed all this money from Bain Capital at very high interest rates, and subsequently are losing their audience and losing money. So a lot of these corporate networks are turning their stations over to sports radio. Mm-hmm. That's what happened in Seattle. We had KPTK, which was our progressive talk station. It was owned by CBS, and it was sold off. And now we have the fifth sports radio station in Seattle. Now, given that the Seahawks kicked, Manning's butt, and the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl, that was great. But what happens is that they basically are putting they're dumping the loans, the debt, onto the local stations, and in order to make money, they're doing sports radio because it's extremely cheap. And even if you're the third or fourth in the ranking, as far as listenership in your area, you can still make money doing sports radio. So that's what's happening. So it's a little bit ridiculous that we have so much sports radio in Seattle, but that's the way it is now. It
is ridiculous. And Mark, that's exactly what happened here in Portland, where I'm at. I was a producer for the Thom Hartmann program when Tom still broadcasted live out of Portland, Oregon at KPOJ at Clear Channel. And I worked at Clear Channel with Thom Hartmann in Portland up until we moved the show to Washington, D.C. I went to D.C. for a couple of years, too. But that's exactly what happened here in Portland. We used to have a progressive radio station, KPOJ, Portland's Progressive Talk, AM 620, owned by Clear Channel, owned by Bain Capital. And the Friday after the 2012 election that Romney lost, that Friday, that week, they flipped KPOJ to Fox Sports Radio. And now it's Fox Sports 620. And Portland already has 2 or 3 other sports stations. We've got AM 1080 The Fan. We've got 750 The Game. And now, no more progressive talk, but we have a third sports station. Thank you, Bain Capital.
Bread and circus.
Yeah, it's very similar to what happened in 2008. If you look at it, look at what happened on Wall Street and some of the large banking firms and financial firms. Many of their representatives, by the way, they are really a big part of the Obama administration. But we're talking Lehman Brothers and those folks. But what happens is that the money is borrowed. The CEOs they take their cut by charging fees for their services, and then they usually get their golden umbrella when they leave. So to them, it doesn't really matter. They don't care about the audience. They don't care about the employees. What they're doing is they're stripping the stations of all of their resources to try to pay back Bain Capital. And according to Norman Goldman, 80% over the last few years, 80% of radio employees are now gone. 80%. I did get a chance to talk to Steve Largent, our Hall of Fame wide receiver up here in Seattle,
Republican,
about that. He agreed that there is a huge media bias in the sports world, and that's true also in news in general. Although I do have to say that Seattle does get a lot of attention news-wise for a city its size, but I think that's just because there's so many major corporations: Starbucks, Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, are all trying to be headquartered here now.
It's a big market. It's like top 15 market, too, I think.
Excuse me?
Seattle's a big market, too. I think it's like top 15 of the media markets.
Yes, you're right. but compared to New York or Chicago, LA, that's still small. So we have to keep that in mind. But it's a major issue. This whole subject. I mean, if it hadn't been for, here's the point, and it's not surprising that Clear Channel would sell that station right after the election, because without progressive political voices on the air, it's very difficult for progressive politics, even in a city like Seattle. You need to have people on the air talking about the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign, which we started the program, talking about. Because if you don't, then, the media actually has been very effective in swinging political campaigns in the past. So it comes back to this political issue of why are these voices being suppressed? And if you talk to folks like Thom Hartmann, he'll tell you that, Clear Channel definitely has a right-wing bias. So there you go. It's people buying the system, just like, the whole Citizens United decision has changed everything. We had our own experience with that with GMO labeling. There was an initiative last year, Initiative 522, and of course Monsanto and DuPont and the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which includes everybody, basically, that has anything to do with GMOs, spent so much money that they just squashed, the campaign. And that's what happens when you don't have voices in the media. You don't have a diversity of voices representing alternative points of view. Luckily, in Seattle, we were surprisingly able to elect a very alternative candidate for our city council. So issues like the $15 an hour minimum wage are getting attention here. Mm-hmm. And it is sort of setting a standard for the rest of the country, which I tend to be proud of. That's Seattle and Washington State is on the forefront of issues like same-sex marriage and legalization of marijuana, and now hopefully on this issue as well. But if folks want to know more about the campaign in Seattle for $15 an hour, which is sort of also attracting a lot of attention from around the country and around the world, you can go to 15now.org, 15now.org, and follow that there. But there is a political issue here which ties into, the Federal Communications Commission and what happens in our national and local elections. There's also another group up in Seattle called the Northwest Progressive Institute, which has been working on these kinds of issues. But I was interested in actually asking you folks what was going on with the Portland station, because apparently there was a Kickstarter campaign and they raised, $250,000 or something, and were able to buy frequency.
Yes, it's a big deal, and it's so motivating and inspiring. I'm so happy you mentioned it, Mark, because Portland, we lost KPOJ in 2012, as we just mentioned, and since then we've got community radio KBOO, which is it's a great community radio station, and they do news, and they're pretty progressive. They play Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! KBOO's a little unorganized, and so it's tough to always go back because it could be something different, and that's great. They're very diverse, but we don't have a progressive, real dedicated progressive station anymore, and folks have rallied around and basically built from the bottom up, grassroots, starting with a very simple idea. We don't have a progressive station anymore in Portland. Portland is a very progressive place. The audience here needs, there is a demand for the service and the product. And so people came together. They organized. They got a couple of ideas. They got a website. It's xray.fm. And big part thanks to the FCC decision on low-powered FM frequencies, which is a great thing for community radio stations across the country to give strength and power to the community radio stations. And folks in Portland said, okay, let's do it. They applied for a license, and they're going through the application processes, and they got a website up, and they said, hey, we're trying to bring progressive radio back to Portland. Is anybody interested? They started a Kickstarter. They said, hey, if you can give us a few $1,000, We can build a very limited and basic studio. We can broadcast. We'll bring back Thom Hartmann. We'll bring back Norman Goldman. We'll bring back Adam Klugman, and we'll bring back Carl Wolfson on the air and do progressive radio. And they started out with a goal of somewhere around, I think, $10,000 or $15,000, which, it sounds like a lot of money. You need that much money to build a decent station and, transmitters and antennas and towers and these things. Cost a lot of money. They, like you mentioned, Mark, they were only asking like $10,000, $15,000, and they got over like something like $250,000 people kicked in. And so it's just, for me, it was so inspiring and motivating to see how many people support that idea, how many people want to get behind this. And for me, I'm no longer, and so now there is a very well-funded, by the people, community radio station for the people, who's going to be starting broadcasting. They're going to be live on the FM dial. They're not going to have a huge reach. Of course, it's a very limited operation. Even $250,000 doesn't get you that big of a radio reach. I know, it sounds crazy.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to mention, is that in order to buy the CBS frequency up here that KPTK was on, we're going to have to come up with $6 million.
Yeah.
So it's the problem with the fact that the public airways have been commercialized to the point where it's very difficult to get access to those frequencies, which is part of the reason why we've slipped on the World Press Freedom Index. There is some hope for the future as Clear Channel and other folks default on their loans. There may be some spaces opening up for progressive voices again. Yeah. I'm hoping that in Seattle we can create our own sort of network, and that would be really great. I want to be a part of that. I want to be on the ground floor. I want my own program. You guys have inspired me.
Heck yeah.
I spend so much time on other people's shows, I might as well do my own at some point. But we do have David Goldstein here, who is working on this project as well. He is famous for his liberal blog, Horse's Ass. And there's also
true, honest to God, true story. I met Skeptical Scott at a Drinking Liberally event, and that's how we became friends. True story.
Awesome. Well, there's also Job Parrish here, who was a Seattle Weekly writer for years. He had a column called Mossback, which was awesome. Really great political coverage on the national and local scene. But he was taken, he lost his position at the Seattle Weekly when they stripped down. So it's not just happening, in the audio media. It's the newspapers, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer is now only online. And the Seattle Times have to cut their staff to the bone, which is typical. In fact, Frank Blethen, I think we may have talked about this, actually gave Dino Rossi, the Republican candidate for governor here, I think it was $80,000 in free advertisements, and there was a one-day protest at the Seattle Times where all of the reporters and staff basically walked out and signed a letter and protest that it was a violation of journalistic and editorial ethics. But that's what's happening to the media. And I'm just hoping, we're watching Portland, definitely. I hear a lot of talk amongst the progressive Radio Northwest people up here about what you guys are doing in Portland. But there are many different models that people are working with. One of them is sponsorship models, and two programs that I work with occasionally are the Fallon Forum, excuse me, that's Fallon Forum, FORUM.com. He's a guy out of Des Moines, Iowa, actually, who is a radio guy. There's also somebody from Portland, Carl Wolfson, who's doing things online now, who should be involved in some of this stuff. But Ed Fallon in Des Moines, and then Jeff Santos out of Boston with the Revolution Radio Network, that's AM 1510 there. They have sponsorships for their programs, and so what they get is they get a labor union or some local nonprofit, to basically underwrite the program, which is sort of a public radio model, but they're using it for commercial radio. And another thing I want to mention is that it's been very surprising to me lately to realize that these efforts to bring back, voices like Thom Hartmann and others to the air, and by the way, he is on KBCS up here, which is my former station. It's a Pacifica affiliate.
Oh, right.
But there is a competition actually going on between public radio and these commercial efforts. Because if you look at the market, the competition for this kind of progressive talk ends up being National Public Radio, Pacifica Radio, Public Radio.
Right.
Now, a lot of people love public radio, and I have no problem with it. It's sustained me, most of my life. But I hate pledge drives. I really, really hate them because not only do they force the volunteers and employees to get on the air and, talk up the station for hours and hours at a time, it interrupts programming. You tune into the program you normally listen to that week, and all of a sudden you've got a half-hour pledge drive going on. So it's like listening to religious broadcasting or something. It can really be annoying, and that's just my personal opinion. I'm not trying to say anything bad about public radio. I'm just saying that there is a competition here. So Thom Hartmann is actually on a public radio station in Seattle, but not a commercial station. And so that's another aspect of the whole story that isn't being talked about much. There are efforts on an international and national level for a lot of journalists who kind of came out of the woodwork during the Occupy movement, but many of them were there before. Like there's a group called the Media Consortium, which are the people who started this national press briefing that we do every week at noon on Thursdays Pacific time. But the whole situation is that we're facing, a problem where a lot of alternative media journalists are struggling. A lot of them don't really have a voice, and there are a few places where you can actually get your stuff published to get on the air. So we've been trying to work on that issue for the last year or two. There is an international media coalition on Facebook where people are working on this issue. And there are ongoing efforts to bring all of these networks together. You've got, Radio or Not is one of those efforts. And so what would be great would be to have some kind of hub where a lot of this progressive stuff would be on the same website, and we could all kind of find each other and support each other. It's definitely a mutual assistance kind of project.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the networking is just getting the word out because I would say the number one issue in a lot of respects, once you've gotten the technical side down, is getting the word out. These corporate networks have millions of dollars for their advertising and publicity campaigns, but you don't see, Randy Rhodes' face on a billboard anywhere.
Right.
It's just the way it is.
Well,
we don't have the money in the alternative media to do that, so it has to be word of mouth and networking. Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
Amen. Grassroots, bottom up. It's the only way we're going to do it. It's impossible, damn near, to get, like Walmart to advertise on our show if we're going to sit here and bash Walmart for outsourcing, not paying their employees a living wage, and it's pretty. When you stop and think about it, it's like a no duh. Why would these big corporations want to pay us to badmouth them? It's pretty obvious. And so then you see, well, how come the Rush Limbaughs of the world are on 600 radio stations and making millions and millions and millions of dollars? Oh, maybe it's because they're touting the line of their corporate sponsors that the corporate sponsors want them to, and they mislead the public and don't tell them the truth because it's all about the money.
That's a great point, Jacob. I'm going to steal that, actually, and use it in my webinars because, let's say borrow it.
No, take it, man. Run with it.
Well, here's the thing. I would put it this way. It's difficult to get supporter sponsorship, advertising money from a corporation that you're busy worrying whether they're going to sue you for what you've just reported.
Yeah, no shit.
So, yes. But at the same time, I do have to say, and this comes straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, Norman Goldman, is that folks like Sean Hannity have lost 60% of their audience. The demographics for that kind of right-wing broadcasting, the average age is about 65 now. They're losing their audience. They're losing money and they're losing their audience, but the networks are stuck with these big contracts that they have to pay for at least the next year or two. But here's the surprising information is that a lot of those folks, the Rush Limbaughs and Glenn Beck's and Sean Hannity's, are actually on a lot of blacklists when it comes to advertisers because of the controversy that they stirred up. In other words, some of these advertisers have been the subject of boycott campaigns, etc., because of the broadcasts that the right-wingers are doing. So it's actually a problem for them as well at this point. And what's surprising is that folks like Thom Hartmann or Norman Goldman don't have those kinds of issues with advertisers. So yes, maybe BP isn't going to advertise on their program, but they don't have some of the political, what would you call it, baggage that Hannity and some of the others have. There aren't people going after them. There's just people who don't like them because they have big mouths, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Norman Goldman would cop to that and say, yes, I do.
Yeah, sure.
Which is one reason why you're probably not going to hear him, or at this point, Nicole Sandler, or Randy Rhoads, or Mike Malloy on a public radio station.
Right.
Because, and this is just another opinion, off the cuff here, but a lot of public radio stations that I've not KBOO in Portland, definitely, but other radio stations tend to be moving more towards a NPR, PRI sort of format where it's kind of nice and pleasant.
Yeah.
We'll tell you the bad news, but we'll also, make sure that where the best coffee is in town, and, we'll be very relaxed while we're telling you. Well, outlets like Free Speech Video News are not like that. We've never tried to pretty things up. We just tell it like it is. Just the facts, man.
That's it.
As
and
Dragnet,
it is just the facts. And I want to be clear real quick. When I was producing for Thom Hartmann, Thom would talk about all the time. I would love to have Walmart advertise on my program. I'm not against Walmart advertising and running commercials on my program and paying me to do so, because I'm going to turn around and bash them on the air. It's some people are beholden to their corporate sponsors, and some people just want to tell the truth. And as far as filter-free radio is concerned, if BP or Walmart or whoever wants to advertise on our show, by all means, I will take your money and I will turn around and tell you the truth, that you guys are the problem. So, in case anyone wants to give us money, hey, just saying, gotta throw that one out.
Such is the problem with commercial radio.
Well, Free Speech Radio News is amazing, and maybe not surprising that they went off the air last year for a while, because they have never accepted any corporate sponsorship. Of course, they have always been a part of the Pacifica radio network up until this point, so it's a subscriber-based. But that was what was always amazing to me, is that, working for a place that just doesn't have that kind of funding actually does free your hands editorially to talk about things. I mean, I never had, ever had anyone at Free Speech Radio News tell me this is too controversial,
Yeah.
Or, we might get in trouble if we report this. That's the whole point of Free Speech Radio News, is to report things that aren't being reported. And I think that that's where my focus lies on a lot of these issues, is as a journalist, there's no reason for me to talk about what everyone else is talking about. There are hundreds of people out there reporting on the latest celebrity scandal or whatever. They don't need me to talk about it. My job is to find stories that aren't being reported and focus on them and give them the attention that they need to get, and to go on Thom Hartmann's show, which I do regularly still, and Mike Malloy's show, on Norman Goldman's show, and others, to talk up, issues that aren't getting the attention. Now, if it wasn't for folks like Nicole Sandler, Jeff Santos, and Ed Fallon, and these other folks, a lot of these stories wouldn't get attention at all. So not having those voices on the air is a form of censorship, because it really does create censorship in the media. And that's another website people should check out, obviously, is Project Censorship, because they do some great work. And they're also open to grassroots journalists contacting them with their own stories and trying to get these issues out there. But there are few and far places that do that.
Yeah.
Although Project Censorship does have a report that it comes out with, just like Reporters Without Borders, once a year, with the top censored stories, and they do tend to get coverage of that. It ends up in the New York Times, and places like that. So thank goodness, that's a think tank basically that is run by a professor in media, And so what you've got is a lot of academicians involved in that too. So it's a good thing, but most of these voices are few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, in the quote alternative media or independent media is how I like to term it. Folks are really hungry. We know there's an audience out there. There's a huge audience in Portland and Seattle, the two most progressive cities in the country. And so it's just a matter of who wants to put up the money, and who wants to do the work and who wants to grab hold of this market share. Right now, it's monopolized by these corporate stations, or in Seattle, I would say, stations that are pretty mainstream, even if they consider themselves political talk radio. They're just not going to take on a lot of the stories that I'm covering, which is frustrating for me, of course, because I live in Seattle, so I can't figure out, why KIRO doesn't do some of the stories that I want to talk about.
Yeah, right.
And I have to go to Boston and talk to Jeff Santos in order to get the word out, but that's just the way it is.
And at least you're doing it, man. At least you're doing it.
Somebody's got to. That's the other thing, is that my motto as a journalist, and it's also, I think I told you guys through Facebook, I'm writing this detective novel set in Seattle in 1947, and one of the characters is a journalist, and he says straight up in the book, my job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Hell
the rich
yeah.
folks don't need me standing up for them. They got plenty of attorneys.
Hell yes.
Big-time media people backing them. It's the grassroots movements and the community, local community voices, and some of these international stories that aren't being covered. They're the ones who need some kind of, if not advocacy journalism, at least someone needs to report on what's going on. So to me, that's what a good journalist should be thinking when they're doing their story. Not how much money am I making or am I going to get on TV today. It's, because there's the bandwagon effect. Everybody wants to report the same story.
Right.
I think, really what people should do is investigative journalism. If not investigative journalism, at least hard-nosed, straight-up news reporting. And I just don't hear that much of that in the United States anymore. It's difficult. You have to go online, basically, and that's the other part of the story, is that all of these people that we've been talking about are now online, live streaming, and broadcasting. They're struggling to sustain their networks and their programming financially, but technologically, they're actually way ahead of a lot of other folks. In fact, public radio is not necessarily that good at keeping up with the technology. They still think that the tower, that radio tower, should be their focus of attention, and it really is not. Right. And KEXP, which is a music station here in Seattle, although John Parrish, the guy I mentioned before, the journalist, has a program called Mind Over Matters every Saturday morning on that station. Most of it is music, and it's Paul Allen's station, basically. But they're smart enough that they've gone to the web as their source of an audience. So they have an international audience, and they are actually even promoting and sponsoring music concerts in New York City. So that tells you that, some folks have figured it out. Norman Goldman pointed to his smartphone and said, "This is the new transistor radio, folks. So get that through your heads." So we have to start thinking that way. Also, multimedia.
Yep.
People don't just want to listen to an audio signal anymore. I mean, it's great for me, when I'm doing my dishes or something, to be able to listen to it in the background. Mm-hmm. But a lot of folks, they want to watch the live stream of the broadcast on their smartphone, in transit or whatever. And also they like text, they like articles to go with the stories that they hear on the air. So people are really into multimedia these days, and I think the idea of radio as an audio signal is out the door, just like the idea of television, which is basically just that cathode ray tube with all that lead and cadmium or whatever. That's out the window too. Yeah. That's not what media is. Media is now multimedia, so everyone actually can have their own radio, TV station, news network. All they have to do is put in the time and effort. The technology is there.
You're the man, Mark. We're out of time. I got to touch base with our news report here in about 30 seconds. Mark Taylor-Canfield, journalist, musician, actor, blogging at Huffington Post, Daily Kos, truthout.org, and Pacifica Network from Seattle. Find him on Facebook, facebook.com/M Taylor-Canfield, and on Twitter. Mark, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, man. And let's do it again soon, and keep up the good work out there, buddy.
Ditto, and keep an eye on the 15-hour minimum wage campaign in Seattle. They're going to try to push the city council to pass an ordinance by April, and if they don't, there will be a citywide forum, and they'll run it as a citywide referendum to be on the ballot for November. So,
Mark Taylor-Canfield, journalist, activist, blogger, Facebook.com/MTaylorCanfield. Find him on Twitter. And the conversation that we had this morning is exactly what Mark writes about, reports on, covers. We've been friends with Mark since Occupy Wall Street a couple of years ago now, 3 years ago now. Back when Mark was kind of initiating some of the coverage of what was happening in Seattle, when the grandma got pepper sprayed, Mark was there. When Cornel West was speaking at Occupy Seattle, Mark was there, and so much more. So it's always a pleasure, and and the whole point is participation. It's democracy. It's I don't want to sit here and talk for 2 hours because, that's boring. And so I want people to participate. It's great to get Mark on. If folks want to call into the show, it's 503-746-TALK. And right now, I am awaiting a call from the Talk Radio News Service. It's time to touch base with the Talk Radio News Service, talkradionews.com, to get the latest on what's happening. And with that, we have Talk Radio News on the line with us, talkradionews.com, from Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, this morning on the Nicole. Mark Taylor-Canfield, journalist, activist, blogger, Facebook.com/MTaylorCanfield. Find him on Twitter. And the conversation that we had this morning is exactly what Mark writes about, reports on, covers. We've been friends with Mark since Occupy Wall Street a couple of years ago now, 3 years ago now. Back when Mark was kind of initiating some of the coverage of what was happening in Seattle, when the grandma got pepper sprayed, Mark was there. When Cornel West was speaking at Occupy Seattle, Mark was there, and so much more. So it's always a pleasure. And and the whole point is participation. It's democracy. It's I don't want to sit here and talk for 2 hours because that's boring. And so I want people to participate. It's great to get Mark on. If folks want to call into the show, it's 503-746-TALK. And right now, I am awaiting a call from the Talk Radio News Service. It's time to touch base with the Talk Radio News Service, talkradionews.com, to get the latest on what's happening. And with that, we have Talk Radio News on the line with us, talkradionews.com.
Good morning, it's Ellen Ratner. So the president is he met with John Boehner. We don't know what that meeting consisted of. This is the first time that the speaker has been to the White House for a private meeting with the president in a year.
Oh, wow. Okay. Progress, maybe.
Well, that's right. We don't know what that's about. We do know also that Ukraine is falling apart, and although the press has not paid attention to it, Venezuela is somewhat falling apart for different reasons, but they all also have to do with corruption.
Absolutely. Yeah, all eyes on Ukraine, and Venezuela's on deck.
And the problem is Venezuela is in our backyard.
Yeah. And then there's oil.
We've got to be paying. It's interesting because, yes, it is an oil issue, the big oil issue. And it's interesting that I actually go to Grenada fairly frequently because I'm on the board of the nonprofit medical school. I've got 11 South Sudanese students there. And so I go there frequently, and I often pass through Trinidad Tobago, which is a 30-minute flight from Grenada. Remember, we invaded Grenada in '83. Mm-hmm. And secondly, it is 3 miles from Venezuela.
Oh, wow.
Huh. So, there's a lot that we should be paying attention to there, and we're just not, and the press isn't focused on it. And it's quite unbelievable to me.
That's not good.
And it's close to you guys in Florida.
Yeah. And thank goodness that you're telling us about it, because I don't hear much about it anywhere else, Ellen.
Well, what's really interesting is basically, as you know, when the quote-unquote president died, dictator, whatever he was, it was overtaken, and it was much more socialistic, which would be okay if there wasn't a lot of corruption. And what happens, of course, as soon as you get big oil in there, and it is not controlled, it is corrupt. And people are waiting in line for things like toilet paper. And I've got to tell you, one of these days, if I have the time, I'm going to write a book titled Goose Stepping Through History and Lining Up for Toilet Paper. And when you see that, you either see people goose stepping in military parades, i.e. North Korea, those kind of places, or you see people lined up for toilet paper, you know you got trouble in River City.
Yeah. I want to be one of the first to interview you on that book when that comes out, Ellen.
Well, I got to sit and write it first. But you know, I mean, honestly, that's really where things are at.
Yes, yes. Is there anything else that's happening in the world we should know about?
Yes. Well, Congress is back in session, so we expect to hear quite a bit on that. The president's budget will be out next Monday, and as you know, the president's supposed to have the budget out the first week in February. It keeps getting sort of pushed back a little bit. But the president's budget, as you know, yesterday there was a big deal about cutting out cutting down military to infantry, et cetera, to World War II levels. That would be 74 years ago. So there's a lot of trying to savings on that. There's a question as to whether they're going to use essentially a drone instead of the U-2 spy plane. Now, honesty and whatever, my partner was the second woman to fly the U-2 spy plane. Mm-hmm. When she finishes medical school in December, she's going to be the only physician to have ever flown the U-2 spy plane.
Oh, very cool.
But the question is, you know, the U-2 spy plane and that's scheduled to go bye-bye to a drone, except for the fact that it needs human intelligence. And that's really where, you know, you can cut down on the infantry, and all of us don't like a big military. But if you're going to replace it with drones, that's not my idea of what we ought to be doing for 100 reasons.
Yeah, right. And I know, you know, all the talks of cuts and budget cuts and this and that. I know a lot of people, well, how come we're not going to talk about the defense spending in those cuts? And so, hey, I know some folks are looking forward to that, at least, somewhat.
Right. Now, the other thing is the president is intending to increase the salaries of federal workers 1%. Not a lot, particularly because inflation, et cetera, has gone up a bit more. Mm-hmm. But I guess 1% is better than nothing. My guess is that, as the Republicans will say, and they said at the governor's meeting yesterday, this budget will probably be dead on arrival. And as you know, the Republican House is just not going to pass the president's priorities. Not going to happen.
Not going to happen. All right. There we go.
There are some other issues going on, and this has to do with the gay law in Arizona. And the question is whether Jan Brewer is going to sign it. Even people like John McCain is suggesting that she not sign it. This would allow somebody who wants to get married, who maybe wants to buy a cake, because they're gay, they would not have to serve those people or sell them a cake or any kind of services. So that's number one. It's extremely discriminatory. And then, of course, we have Uganda yesterday signing on to their anti-gay law. And what's interesting, I'll be in South Sudan next week, and the Ugandans, as you know, are completely and totally trying to run South Sudan. It's their biggest trading partner. 70% of the trade in South Sudan is with Uganda.
Right. It's tragic, the developments there, and in Arizona. Eyes on that, and it's not a good thing. But and you know, I'll mention Ellen because I love you and what you do, and you're doing God's work, in my opinion, Ellen. I'll mention real quick that you're still doing Goats for the Old Goat, right?
I am still doing Goats for the Old Goat, and people can contribute. They can buy a goat, and we're the only animal group that people actually get their name with the goat that they are giving. You can buy one of our crystal hearts made by women who have seen somebody killed in front of them, etc.
Mm-hmm. And that's to benefit the folks in South Sudan, right?
That's right.
All right.
Absolutely.
And the website's goatsfortheoldgoat.com.
That's right.
All right. Ellen, I miss you. I hope all is well, and it's always great to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much. Come to Washington and visit.
We'll be there soon.
For the Capitol.
Hopefully come see the cherry blossoms soon. Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, let us know. We'll take you out to dinner or lunch or something fun.
Sounds great, Ellen. I hope all is well, and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ellen Ratner, the Bureau Chief of Talk Radio News Service, talkradionews.com, live from our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., telling us what's the happenings, and Ellen is just a genuine good human being doing good stuff. And I don't think she was anticipating me to go there, but I do want to mention you should really check out goatsfortheoldgoat.com. It's a good thing. We're going to take a real short break, our first break of the show. And when we come back, we have a very special guest. Reporter Lee Fang is going to stop by and tell us about his new article. The Obama administration's TPP trade officials are receiving hefty bonuses from big banks. What's that all about? That's coming up next on the Nicole Sandler Show, RadioOrNot.com.
Questioning Authority Daily. The Nicole Sandler Show.
Hi, friends. This is Thom Hartmann.
This is Stephanie Miller.
Hey, this is Hal Sparks.
I'm Brad Friedman. I approve of Nicole Sandler's RadioOrNot.com.
Radio or Not.
Radio or Not.
RadioOrNot.com.
RadioOrNot.com.
RadioOrNot.com. RadioOrNot.com.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Many activists, myself in the beginning included, mistakenly think that when we're protesting that our target is the government or our target is this corporation, when in fact the real target of our activism is mobilizing the people.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
You're basically evangelizing. You're trying to get more people on your side to reach critical mass to bring about real change.
Filterfreeradio.com.
What's the matter with the post office? The U.S. Postal Service, I mean. The corporate hierarchy that runs this enormously popular public institution. Yes, I know that USPS has lost revenue it traditionally got from first-class mail delivery, but I also know that letter carriers and postal workers have offered many excellent ideas for expanding the services that USPS can deliver, thus increasing both revenue and the importance of maintaining these community treasures. Yet, the Postal Board of Governors, which includes corporate interests that would profit by killing the public service, seems intent on, guess what, killing it. The board's only idea is to cut services and shut down hundreds of local post offices. Incredibly, their list of closures include the historic post office in Philadelphia's Old City, the very building where Ben Franklin presided as our country's first Postmaster General, appointed by the Continental Congress in 1775. All across the country, post offices that are invaluable artistic and historic assets are slated to be sold to developers. One is the marvelous 1935 Bronx Post Office with classical architectural flourishes and 13 museum-worthy murals. It's not just a post office, says one customer, fighting the closure. It's part of my life. No one feels that way about a FedEx warehouse. Yet, says a USPS spokeswoman dismissively, the 4-story building is severely underused. This is Jim Hightower saying, so use it. Put a coffee shop in it, a public internet facility, a library and museum, a one-stop government services center, and, as USPS employees have suggested, a public bank offering basic services to the thousands of neighborhood people ignored by commercial banks. Come on, USPS, show a little creativity and gumption, and remember that service is a key part of your name.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Never know who or what you'll hear when you listen to the Nicole Sandler Show at RadioOrNot.com.
Bill Maher, you're here in Miami on Friday night. You're doing a show at the Fillmore at the Jackie Gleason Theater. They just renamed this theater the Fillmore. And they put up a couple of psychedelic posters. So I guess...
Is it the theater Jackie did his TV show from?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
What I hear they did is put up 2 of those old Bill Graham posters and renamed it.
Yeah, I can't think of 2 different icons of show business.
Yeah, really.
Bill Graham and Jackie Gleason.
Yeah, why they just didn't play up the Jackie Gleason aspect, I don't know. But then again, this is South Florida.
Right. Okay.
Welcome to it.
I feel warned.
The Nicole Sandler Show, live Monday through Thursdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, or podcast anytime at radioornot.com.
RadioOrNot.com and SoFloRadio.com present The Nicole Sandler Show. Truth to power, baby.
Welcome back to the show. We are broadcasting live. It is Tuesday, February 25th, 2014. Nicole Sandler is on a very well-deserved vacation, taking it easy, unplugging, recharging, hanging out with good friends in the Sunshine State. Nicole is going to be back on Thursday. Jacob Dean, Skeptical Scott here from Filter Free Radio. We broadcast Filter Free Radio Monday evenings on Nicole Sandler's Radio or Not network. It is an honor and a privilege to be in for Nicole with you on radioornot.com. We're also live on SoFloRadio.com. We're live on TalkRadio1.com and live on FilterFreeRadio.com. And we're live on Liberal Justice Radio on TuneIn.com and the TuneIn app, thanks to Mr. Kenny Pick. And it is time to get Mr. Lee Fang on, and I'm talking to him right now. Lee Fang is an investigative, independent journalist. I followed Lee since his days at thinkprogress.org as a reporter there. When I was producing for Thom Hartmann, we often got on Lee Fang when he was a reporter at thinkprogress.org. Lee has since left Think Progress and now is a reporting fellow with the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute. He covers politics, he covers conservative movements and lobbying. Lee Fang's work has resulted in multiple calls for hearings in Congress and the FCC. He's the author of the book The Machine, a field guide to the resurgent right, a recently published book on how the right-wing political infrastructure was rebuilt after President Obama's 2008 election. You can find out more about the book at themachinebook.com. And it is my honor to welcome Lee Fang to the program. Lee, it's great to speak with you.
Hey, Jacob. Thank you so much for having me.
I am a big fan of you and a big fan of progressive media. I watch Bill Moyers and Company on a regular basis every week, and thought it was super cool that Bill Moyers did a little highlight of your article, and I was a little disappointed Bill didn't interview you, so I wanted to give you a chance to come on and tell us about your new article, Obama administration's TPP trade officials received hefty bonuses from big banks, over at republicreport.org. Lee, tell us about this article.
Well, Jacob, thanks again for having me on. republicreport.org is my new relaunched investigative blog, and congratulations to your show. We've been looking deep into the revolving door, the movement between the private sector into the public sector and back from the public sector back to the K Street and other corporations. This particular piece looked at how 2 of the officials tapped by the Obama administration to lead the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, how both of those individuals came from large banks with a financial stake in the TPP deal. Not only that, if you look at the financial disclosure forms filed by both of these individuals, they each received large bonus payments as they left the banks to be tapped by the Obama administration. One of those individuals, Michael Froman, he's the trade ambassador, He joined the administration in 2009, and as Citigroup was collapsing, as they were losing lots of money and had to be bailed out by the taxpayer, Citigroup gave Michael Froman over $4 million as a special bonus payment when he joined the Obama administration. And another individual, Stefan Selig, who was nominated last year by the Obama administration to be the Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade, another TPP-related job. He was given a $9 million bonus by Bank of America. Now, this is significant because the banks have a lot to gain from this deal, and ethics experts have said that these bonuses represent a significant conflict of interest because clearly when folks are working even in a public service type job, they're going to remember these bonuses.
Yeah, has anyone reported on this so far yet? Or Lee, you're like the first one to come out with this, aren't you?
We broke the story. Some folks have scrutinized Michael Froman in the past because he has been in the administration for the last 5 years, but not in context of the TPP. And for Stefan Selig, no one's reported any of this information, so we were the first.
Can you, Lee, can you elaborate on more on this, the revolving door between Wall Street and the government, and how these financial executives are actually getting a bigger golden parachute bonus if they leave Wall Street to go work as a Wall Street regulator in the government?
Yeah, this is an interesting dynamic that I've reported on for a little while, but it's a much bigger scandal that deserves greater scrutiny. So a lot of the large banks, we know from their 8K filings, because they're publicly traded, they report their executive contract information. Well, they actually have a clause in their contract that says if one of their executives leaves their bank for a high-level government job or a regulation type job with the government, they are entitled to special stock options, special financial rewards if they leave the bank and enter those types of positions. Now that has essentially professionalized and normalized the revolving door if they are actually encouraging their executives to burrow into government. Now, the banks aren't the only firms engaged in this activity. If you look at the 8K filing for Northrop Grumman, there's a very similar clause that encourages their executives to enter government work, to go to the Department of Defense, to go to Congress, and work in these high-level staff positions. If you look at financial disclosure forms across the board, it looks like this phenomenon is pretty widespread, although it's very difficult to tell because if you look at the financial disclosure forms, they don't say the exact circumstances from which the bonus was awarded, but you do see these, $800,000 million or $1.5 million bonuses that look very suspicious from many different executives coming from all different types of industries, including many lobbying firms. Now, I've talked to ethics experts, and they've called this a bounty, for an executive to burrow into government and to do a certain deed that benefits their former employers. And then often once they move back through the revolving door, they spent 2 or 3 years in government, they've done something that helps corporations or their former employers, they then move back into the private sector, and in many cases they're then given another bonus. So the idea that folks are moving through the revolving door, that they're taking these jobs that pay much less, these bonuses help cushion their lifestyle so they don't have to move from Potomac or stop. They can still live like multimillionaires even if they're working in public sector jobs.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with investigative reporter Lee Fang. He's a reporting fellow with the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute and reporting at republicreport.org, and the author of his new book, The Machine, A Field Guide to the Resurgent Right. Lee, how is this not illegal? It sounds criminal.
This is a good question, and this is the kind of big loophole. You think of a tin pot third world dictatorship where the top government officials are just taking million-dollar bribes in a briefcase. Well, that's illegal here in America, clearly. But it is legal to receive a bonus before you enter government or after you enter government. So this is a pretty substantial loophole.
Isn't this like the foxes guarding the hen house? To what extent can the foxes guard the hen house?
I will say the foxes guarding the hen house is an apt description. Look, we haven't had any investigations of criminal activity related to the financial crisis. We haven't looked into, like I mentioned, the high-level corruption that is probably going on right now. And I think it's unfortunate. And you look through the major regulatory agencies, look at how Obama's reshuffled the CFTC, which is supposed to oversee derivatives. Look at the new leadership at the SEC. Many of these are bankers or banking executive lawyers. It's unfortunate that President Obama hasn't taken or hasn't reached out, cast a wider net, found more public interest type individuals to help him with his administration. He's bringing many of these industry folks in. Some of them, you could argue, simply have more experience since they understand the banking industry or the defense contracting industry. Maybe they'll be more aggressive, but time and time again, you bring in folks who are part of this industry, and they are very sympathetic to industry and are more likely to seek bigger giveaways to those industries.
We're speaking with investigative reporter Lee Fang. His new article, Obama Administration's TPP trade officials received hefty bonuses from big banks, over at republicreport.org. And Bill Moyers mentioned it over the weekend on Moyers and Company on public broadcasting television. Lee, can you get back to how the TPP fits in here?
You know, the TPP is not just a trade deal. Leaked texts of the negotiating documents, which have been done in secret, but they've been leaked by WikiLeaks, and Public Citizen, the advocacy group, has obtained some of these and helped explain them to the press. Like other trade deals, the TPP will contain an investor stake provision, and that basically allows corporations to take entire governments to foreign tribunals and challenge proposed regulations. So this TPP deal will allow corporations to challenge environmental rules that are enacted by certain member companies of the TPP deal. When it comes to banks, there are a number of financial regulations that, oh, excuse me, my computer.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, it's all
right. Will allow banks to challenge certain financial regulations. So, for example, you know, we used to have Glass-Steagall, so-called firewalls between financial institutions. Mm-hmm. If other countries attempt to enact these types of rules, at least the draft TPP negotiation documents show that banks will actually be able to take those governments to court and knock down those proposed regulations, other regulations on derivatives, on capital outflows. So these banks will have special powers that can supersede the democratic right of any of these countries to enact regulations on their own home industries.
Mm. In the minute or so we've got left with you, Lee, I don't want to take up too much of your time. Your time is much more valuable doing the investigative journalism that you do. What is the most important take-home part of this article that you want folks to really get?
Well, look, the traditional media is not spending much time at all on the TPP, so I would say the biggest take-home is to just pay closer attention, dig what you can on the internet, find out about the deal, because at least broadcast and cable media is not covering the negotiations. Negotiations will go on for the next couple of months, but pay close attention because this has huge ramifications, not just in terms of trade, but as I mentioned, also on all different forms of regulation.
Lee Fang, investigative journalist, reporting with the Nation Institute and republicreport.org. Where those are the best websites for folks to find your work at, right, Lee?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you so much for mentioning them, Jacob, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you so much for your time. Keep up the great work. I hope we can do it again soon.
Sounds great. Take care, Jacob.
Thank you, Lee. You as well. Lee Fang, investigative journalist, reporting fellow with the Investigative Fund at the Nation Institute, and republicreport.org, covering money and politics and conservative movements and lobbying. And Lee is doing some great, brilliant investigative reporting. And when I saw that even Bill Moyers took 5-10 minutes over the weekend to mention that article, I said, you know what? I wish Bill would have interviewed Lee. And I said, well, you know, I don't host on the Nicole Sandler Show, radioornot.com. We will be right back.
It's Nicole Sandler on radioornot.com.
Hi, friends. This is Thom Hartmann.
This is Stephanie Miller.
Hey, this is Hal Sparks.
I'm Brad Friedman. I approve of Nicole Sandler's radioornot.com.
Radio or not?
Radio or not?
Radioornot.com.
Radioornot.com. Radioornot.com. Radioornot.com.
Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Seeing themselves as a huge movement to transform the nation.
The change that we want comes from below. It comes from a movement.
The American people can and will find ways to push for the kinds of changes that can get us out of this dilemma.
I want to see that change, and it's going to take people here in this country to be able to make that happen.
Filter-free radio. Filterfreeradio.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. After facing criticism from just about everyone, including Republican politicians, Ted Nugent offered a disingenuous apology for his comments calling President Obama a subhuman mongrel. Here he is on the Ben Ferguson Show.
Did you cross the line by calling the President of the United States of America that? And if you saw Barack Obama, would you apologize to him for saying that about him?
Yes, I would. I did cross the line. I do apologize, not necessarily to the president, but on behalf of much better men than myself.
Even if Nugent's apology had been sincere, it is just one example in his long history of racist, sexist, and anti-immigrant commentary. Last year on the Alex Jones Show, Nugent claimed African Americans could fix, quote, the black problem if they just put their heart and soul into being honest, law-abiding, and delivering excellence at every move in your life. In the past, Nugent has also compared Obama to a Nazi, used the C word in reference to Hillary Clinton, and said that if someone is a suspected undocumented immigrant, he'd, quote, like to shoot them dead. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Hey friends, Jacob Dean here with exciting news. You can now hear my show, Filter Free Radio, on the free Stitcher mobile app. Just download the free Stitcher app from Stitcher.com or in the App Store and search for Filter Free Radio. That's all there is to it. No syncing, no taking up memory on your device. Just Filter Free Radio on demand for you on the go. Plus, you can rate and review Filter Free Radio on Stitcher. The more you rate, review, and share us, the higher we will rank on Stitcher, and that means the more people will discover Filter Free Radio. It's never been easier to enjoy Filter Free Radio and help us spread the word. So download the free Stitcher app, search for Filter Free Radio, and start benefiting from unfiltered radical truth-telling anytime, anywhere. Thanks, and keep up the good fight.
You never know who or what you'll hear when you listen to the Nicole Sandler Show at radioornot.com.
Your view is not being represented in this country because all of our views have been corrupted by money and politics. Remember, 94% of the time, the candidate who raises the most money wins.
That's the fact that we need to drive home constantly. It's all about the money. Dylan Radigan, you...